What if, um, what if knowing the answers wasn't actually the best way to start learning something? Like, what if instead of trying to get everything right from the get-go, we actually embrace those moments when we just completely blank?
That's a really interesting thought, actually.
Yeah, imagine if those initial stumbles, those wrong answers, were actually like secret little stepping stones that helped us build stronger, more lasting understanding.
I like where you're going with this. It kind of flips the script on how we traditionally approach learning, right?
Exactly.
No.
And that's what we're going to explore today, this idea of pre-instruction testing.
Yeah, it's a technique, a strategy, really, where you test yourself on material before you had a chance to actually study it.
Yeah, before you even crack open the textbook or watch the lecture video, you dive straight into a quiz or a set of questions, knowing full well that you're probably going to get a lot of them wrong.
And that's the part that often throws people off, right? It feels counterintuitive. Like, why would I willingly subject myself to that kind of, I don't know, failure before I've even had a chance to learn the material?
Right, it feels almost like setting yourself up for discouragement. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets really fascinating. A lot of research is suggesting that this initial struggle, this pre-instruction testing, can actually be a huge boost for learning.
It's like prepping your brain in a way that just reading or passively listening doesn't quite achieve.
Okay, so let's lay it all out for our listeners. We're diving deep into pre-instruction testing, pre-questioning, or pre-testing. You'll hear those terms used interchangeably in the literature.
Exactly. And we've been digging into research that explores this technique across a range of formats: text, video, lectures, all sorts of stuff. We want to figure out what the evidence says about its effectiveness, why it seems to work, and ultimately how you can use it to become a more effective learner.
All right, so let's start with the basics. Can you walk us through what a typical research study on pre-instruction testing looks like?
Sure. You usually have two groups of participants, an experimental group and a control group. The experimental group is the one that gets the pre-instruction testing. So they might be given a set of questions about a topic, like a history chapter or a scientific concept, before they've read anything about it.
Okay, so they're basically jumping into the deep end, trying to answer questions they have absolutely no clue about.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the control group just skips this whole pre-testing phase. They go straight to the learning material, whether it's reading a text, watching a video, or listening to a lecture.
Got it. So both groups get exposed to the same content, but the experimental group has that initial hurdle of the pretest.
Exactly. And then, after they've both had a chance to learn, both groups are tested on the material, usually with the same post-test. This allows researchers to compare how well each group remembers and understands the information.
So it's all about seeing if that initial blind test, the pre-instruction testing, makes a difference in how much sinks in.
Precisely. And that's where things get interesting. Time and again, across many different studies and types of learning materials, the research shows that the group that did the pre-instruction testing tends to perform better on the post-test.
Wow, so even though they initially bomb the pretest, it somehow sets them up for greater success later on.
Yeah, it's like that initial struggle, that grappling with the unknown, somehow primes their brains to be more receptive to the information when they do finally encounter it.
It's almost like saying, hey, brain, we're going to need this information soon, so start paying attention.
Haha, yeah, kind of. Now, it's important to be clear about what we mean by pre-instruction testing. Sometimes you'll see researchers use terms like pre-questions or pre-testing. They're often used interchangeably, but there can be subtle differences in how they're implemented.
Okay, so break it down for us. What are some of the common ways pre-instruction testing is actually done in these studies?
Well, one approach is to give participants the pretest completely cold, with no hints or clues, and then have them dive into the learning material, almost like they're on a treasure hunt for those answers they tried to come up with earlier.
I can see how that would make you really pay attention and actively search for the information. It's like you've planted a seed of curiosity with each question.
Exactly. Another common method is to provide immediate feedback after each pretest question. So, you might get the answer wrong, but you're instantly corrected and have a chance to study the correct answer right then and there.
Okay, so that's almost like embedding little mini learning moments within the testing itself.
Exactly. And then there's another variation called interpolated pre-questioning or pre-testing. This involves breaking up the learning material into smaller chunks and having participants take a pre-test after each segment before moving on to the next.
So it's like a continuous cycle of testing and learning, testing and learning.
Precisely. Now, across all these variations, the key element is that the testing comes before any formal instruction on the material. And that brings us to an important distinction. Pre-instruction testing is not the same as retrieval practice.
Right, retrieval practice is where you test yourself after you've learned something as a way to strengthen those memories.
Exactly. Both involve testing, but the timing is crucial. Retrieval practice is about solidifying what you've already learned, while pre-instruction testing is about setting the stage for more effective learning.
Okay, so we've got a good grasp of what pre-instruction testing is and how it's typically studied. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter. What does the research actually say about its effectiveness? Does this counterintuitive approach really work?
Well, the short answer is a resounding yes. The evidence from numerous studies is remarkably consistent. Pre-instruction testing enhances memory, and often quite significantly.
That's pretty amazing considering that people are basically failing these pre-tests initially.
I know, right? It seems like that initial struggle, that act of grappling with what you don't know, somehow sets the stage for more robust encoding of the information later on.
Okay, so walk us through some of the specific studies that have demonstrated these memory benefits.
All right, well, one of the early studies that really piqued researchers' interest was conducted by Richland and colleagues back in 2009. They had participants read a text passage about a condition called cerebral achromatopsia, which affects color vision.
Cerebral what?
Cerebral achromatopsia. It's basically a condition where people can't see color.
Oh, wow, that must be challenging.
Yeah, it is. Anyway, in this study, some participants were given a set of questions about the passage before they read it, while others went straight to the text. And what they found was that the group who attempted to answer the pre-questions, even though they got most of them wrong initially, actually remembered significantly more about cerebral achromatopsia, both immediately after reading the passage and even a week later.
So even a week later, they still had a better grasp of the material. That's impressive.
Yeah, it suggests that this isn't just a fleeting short-term memory boost. It seems to have a lasting impact. And this finding isn't just limited to obscure medical conditions. Similar memory benefits from pre-instruction testing have been found in studies using a wide range of text-based materials, covering topics from history and geography to science and even science fiction.
Okay, so regardless of the subject matter, grappling with questions beforehand seems to make the information stick better.
Exactly. Now, let's move beyond text. Another study, this one by Cornell and colleagues in 2009, looked at the effect of pre-instruction testing on learning trivia facts. You know, those random bits of knowledge that are fun to know but not necessarily essential.
Oh yeah, like capital cities or historical dates.
Yeah, exactly. And they found that participants who tried to answer pre-test questions about these trivia facts, even if they couldn't recall any of the answers correctly at first, ended up remembering more of those facts later on compared to those who didn't do the pre-test. And this was true even when the final test was delayed for up to 48 hours.
So it seems like pre-instruction testing can make even those seemingly random, isolated facts more memorable.
Absolutely. Now, another interesting area of research has focused on paired associate learning. This is where you try to learn to link two unrelated words together, like dog and banana or cloud and hammer.
Okay, I can see how that would be tricky.
Right. And what they found is that pre-instruction testing can be particularly helpful in these scenarios, especially when there's at least a weak semantic connection between the words, even if it's just a shared category or a vague association.
So it's like your brain is trying to find some kind of link, even if it's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, and when you're then given the correct pairing, it kind of clicks into place more easily. And immediate feedback, like we talked about earlier, seems to be crucial in these cases.
Got it. So the quicker you get that confirmation or correction, the better it seems to work.
Right. And it's not just limited to adults. This effect has also been observed in studies with younger children, suggesting that it might be a fundamental learning mechanism that operates across different age groups.
That's fascinating. It suggests it might be a pretty universal principle of learning.
It really does. Now, shifting gears a bit, what about learning new vocabulary words, especially in a foreign language?
Oh yeah, that's always a challenge.
Right. Well, the research on pre-instruction testing and vocabulary learning suggests that it can definitely help, but it seems to primarily boost recognition rather than recall.
Okay, what's the difference between those two again?
So recognition is when you're able to identify the correct answer from a list of options, like a multiple choice question. Recall is when you have to retrieve the answer from memory without any cues.
Okay, I see. So pre-testing might make you better at picking the right definition from a list, but it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be able to spout it out spontaneously.
Exactly. Now, moving on to the world of videos, which is how so many of us consume information these days, there's been some really interesting research on the impact of pre-instruction testing in video-based learning environments.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious about that. I watch a ton of educational videos.
Well, Carpenter and Toffness conducted a study in 2017 using videos about Easter Island. They broke the videos down into segments and had some participants try to answer questions about each segment before watching it. And guess what? Those who did the pre-questions ended up remembering significantly more about the content compared to those who just watched the videos straight through.
So even just having those questions in mind before hitting play seems to make a difference.
It really does. And this finding has been replicated in other studies using videos of varying lengths and covering a wide range of topics.
Okay, so it seems like the evidence for the benefits of pre-instruction testing is pretty strong across different media, from text and trivia to vocabulary and videos. But here's a question that keeps popping into my mind. Does this benefit only apply to the specific information that's covered in the pretest questions, or does it have a more widespread effect on learning?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of what researchers call transfer of learning. Basically, we want to know if pre-instruction testing helps you learn not just the stuff you're directly tested on, but also related information or even brand new concepts you haven't encountered before.
Right. Does it make you a more adaptable learner overall?
Exactly. Now, the evidence on this is a bit more mixed. When it comes to transfer to untested material that is still part of the learning material you're studying, there are some promising findings. Some studies have shown that pre-instruction testing can lead to better memory for related information, even if it wasn't explicitly tested.
So it's like it creates a halo effect, boosting your understanding of the broader context.
Yeah, kind of. However, there are also studies that haven't found this broader benefit, so the results aren't as consistent as they are for the directly tested material. Interestingly, some of the most positive transfer effects have been observed with those paired associate word pairs, where pretesting on one part of the pair can strengthen memory for the other part as well.
Okay, so there's some potential spillover, but it's not always a guarantee.
Right. Now, when we look at transfer to entirely new situations, like making inferences or applying knowledge to solve novel problems, the evidence is even more limited. There are some hints that pre-instruction testing might help, but more research is definitely needed in this area.
So the jury's still out on whether it makes you a more flexible, adaptable thinker overall.
Yeah, that's fair to say. Now, one thing that's important to remember is that a lot of this research has been conducted in controlled lab settings.
Right, with carefully designed experiments and all that.
Exactly. So a natural question is, does this stuff actually translate to real-world learning environments like classrooms?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we ultimately care about, right?
Absolutely. And thankfully, there have been a number of studies that have taken pre-instruction testing out of the lab and into the wild, so to speak, to see if it holds up in more realistic educational settings.
Okay, tell us about those. What have they found?
Well, there's some really encouraging evidence. For example, Beckman in 2008 did a study in an aerospace engineering course where students were given pre-tests before each unit of instruction. And what they found was that the students who did the pre-tests consistently scored significantly higher on the unit tests compared to those who didn't.
So it wasn't just a one-off fluke. It actually translated to better performance in the course.
Right. And this isn't just limited to engineering. Carpenter and colleagues in 2018 found similar benefits in a psychology lab course when students were given pre-questions at the start of each lecture.
Okay, so we're seeing real-world evidence across different disciplines. That's promising.
It is. And what's even more impressive is that some studies have shown long-term benefits. Soderstrom and Bjork did a study in 2023 where they found that students in a psychology research methods course who were pre-tested on material showed lasting improvements on the final exams, even weeks after the initial learning took place.
Wow, so it's not just about cramming for the next test. It seems to contribute to more durable learning.
Exactly. Now, it's important to note that not every classroom-based study has found such positive results. For instance, Janelli and Liptovich in 2021 studied the use of pre-testing in a massive open online course, or MOOC, on climate change. They found that while students who persisted in the course and engaged with the pre-tests tended to perform better, the pre-testing also seemed to be associated with higher dropout rates.
Oh, that's interesting. So maybe the initial difficulty of those pre-tests was discouraging to some students.
That's definitely a possibility, especially in a self-paced online environment where there's less support and accountability. But on a more positive note, DeLima and Yeager in 2020 found that even elementary school students showed enhanced recall of key vocabulary words from a text passage when they were pre-tested on those words before reading.
Okay, so even young learners can benefit from this.
It seems so. And then there's a really fascinating study by Willis and colleagues in 2020 that took place in a medical setting. They looked at medical students learning a surgical procedure, and they found that those who attempted to perform the procedure before watching an instructional video, even though they obviously didn't know how to do it properly yet, actually learned faster and made fewer errors during practice.
So it's like that initial struggle, that productive failure, somehow set them up for success.
Exactly. It really highlights how actively engaging with something, even if you don't have all the knowledge or skills yet, can prime you for more effective learning.
That's so cool. Okay, so we've seen that pre-instruction testing can work in a variety of educational settings, from classrooms to online courses to even surgical training.
Mhm.
Now let's talk about the pre-tests themselves. Does the specific format of the test matter? Like, is multiple choice better than short answer, or does it even make a difference?
That's a good question. And the good news is that overall, the benefits of pre-instruction testing seem to be pretty consistent across different formats, whether it's cued recall, short answer, fill in the blank, or multiple choice. The positive effects are generally observed.
So it's not about finding the perfect format, it's more about the act of testing itself.
Yeah, that seems to be the key. Now, there are some nuances. Little and Bjork did a study in 2016 where they found that multiple choice pretests, especially those with carefully designed incorrect options that are related to the correct answer, could actually enhance transfer of learning to information that wasn't directly tested.
Wait, so even the wrong answers can be helpful?
Exactly. It's like those plausible but incorrect options can still expose you to related concepts and help you start making connections.
That's really interesting. So it's not just about getting the right answer, it's about engaging with the material in a deeper way.
Precisely. Now, as for the post-test, the one that's used to assess learning at the end, the specific format doesn't seem to crucially impact whether the benefits of pretesting are detected. There are some exceptions, like with those semantically unrelated paired associates we talked about earlier, where the advantages of pretesting tend to be more apparent on recognition tests than recall tests.
Okay, that makes sense. If there's no inherent connection between the words, pretesting might help you recognize the correct pairing when you see it, even if you can't spontaneously recall it from memory.
Right. Now, another important question is the role of feedback. We talked about how immediate feedback seems to be crucial for those paired associates, but is that always the case?
Yeah, does it matter when you get that feedback?
Well, it seems like the timing of feedback can depend on the type of material. For those weakly associated word pairs, immediate feedback is definitely key. Studies have shown that delaying feedback in those cases can actually negate the benefits of pretesting.
So you need that instant confirmation or correction to make those connections stick.
Yeah. But for more semantically rich materials, like those trivia facts or the text passages, delayed feedback can still be effective. In some cases, the timing of feedback doesn't significantly alter the magnitude of the pre-instruction testing effect.
That's interesting. So for more complex or meaningful information, the act of trying to retrieve the answer, even without immediate correction, might be enough to prepare your brain for better learning.
It seems that way. Now, speaking of lasting effects, one of the most encouraging findings from the research is that the memory benefits of pre-instruction testing can be quite durable.
That's great to hear. So how long do these benefits typically last?
Well, studies have shown benefits persisting for at least 24 hours, and in some cases, even up to a week or more for text-based materials. Kliegel and colleagues even found that the positive effect of pretesting on understanding text passages actually increased over a week-long retention interval. And we've already talked about those classroom studies where the benefits were evident on final exams weeks later.
Okay, so it's clear that this isn't just a quick fix or a temporary boost. It seems to have real staying power.
It does. It suggests that pre-instruction testing doesn't just help you remember things for the next test. It helps you learn things more deeply and retain them for longer periods.
All right, so we've looked at the evidence, we've explored how it works in different settings, and we've seen that the benefits can be long-lasting. Now, I'm curious about the learners themselves. What's going on in their minds when they're going through this pre-instruction testing process?
That's a great question. And here's where things get really fascinating. Learners often don't realize that pre-instruction testing is actually helping them.
Wait, what? They don't recognize the benefits they're experiencing.
It seems that way. Hulser and Metcalf did a study in 2012 where they found that participants who learned word pairs through pretesting actually rated this method as less effective for their learning compared to simply reading the word pairs, even though they objectively remembered the pretested pairs better.
That's amazing. So there's a disconnect between how effective it is and how effective people perceive it to be.
Exactly. It seems like there's this metacognitive illusion going on. We might feel like we're not learning as much when we're struggling with those initial pretests, even when the evidence clearly shows otherwise.
So why do you think that is? Why this misperception?
Well, one possibility is that we tend to focus on our errors and feel discouraged by them rather than seeing them as valuable learning opportunities.
Makes sense. No one likes to feel like they're failing, even if it's just a pretest.
Right. And there's also a natural tendency to prefer passive learning methods, like just reading or listening, over active methods that require more effort and might involve making mistakes. It feels easier, even if it's not actually more effective.
So we might gravitate towards what feels comfortable, even if it's not the best way to learn.
Exactly. Now, the good news is that research suggests we can overcome this misperception. One way is to explicitly explain to learners the benefits of errorful generation. That is, the idea that making mistakes and then correcting them can actually strengthen learning.
So it's about reframing those errors as stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks.
Precisely. Another approach is to provide learners with direct experience of pre-instruction testing, coupled with clear feedback showing how it actually improved their performance compared to other methods. Pan and Rivers found in 2023 that when participants received feedback demonstrating they had done better on items they were pre-tested on, their predictions for future recall started to favor pre-testing.
So seeing is believing, as they say.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to the really big question. Why does pre-instruction testing work? What are the underlying mechanisms that explain these memory and learning benefits?
Yeah, let's dive into the theoretical side of things.
Okay, well, there are actually several competing theories, and which ones are most relevant often depends on whether we're talking about pretesting with immediate feedback, like with those paired associates, or pretesting with delayed feedback, like with the text and video materials.
Okay, so let's start with the immediate feedback scenarios. What are some of the main explanations there?
All right, well, one prominent theory is the mediator account. This proposes that even an incorrect guess during the pretest can act as a mental link, a mediator, that helps you connect to the correct answer when you receive that feedback. It's like the wrong answer creates a pathway in your brain that can then be linked to the right information.
So that's almost counterintuitive. The wrong answer becomes a stepping stone to the right one.
Exactly. Another theory is the search set account, which suggests that attempting to answer a pretest question activates a bunch of potential answers in your memory. And when you then see the correct answer in the feedback, it gets a boost because your brain is already primed and searching in that area.
So it's like you've warmed up those mental muscles, so to speak.
Yeah, kind of. Then there's the recursive reminding account, which proposes that the act of generating a wrong answer and then being corrected is encoded as a single memory event. So when you later recall the context of making the error, it also triggers retrieval of the correct information.
Interesting. It's like the error and the correction become intertwined in your memory.
Exactly. And finally, there's the prediction error account, which suggests that the mismatch between your incorrect guess and the correct answer creates a kind of surprise signal in your brain, and that signal enhances attention and strengthens the subsequent learning.
So it's like your brain goes, whoa, that was wrong. I better pay extra attention now.
Haha, yeah, something like that. Now, those are some of the main theories for pre-testing with immediate feedback. When you look at pretesting with delayed feedback, where the learner has to search for the answers in the subsequent learning material, the explanations often revolve around how pretesting influences attention, curiosity, and the way we process information.
Okay, so walk us through those ideas.
Well, one key concept is the mathemagenic hypothesis, which basically suggests that asking questions makes us more active and engaged learners. It's like those questions create a need to know, which drives us to search for answers and make connections.
Makes sense. If you're just passively reading or listening, you might not be as motivated to really dig into the material.
Exactly. And some researchers believe that pretesting specifically boosts interest and curiosity, making us more intrinsically motivated to learn. Others emphasize the role of attention, suggesting that pre-instruction testing helps us focus on what's most important and ignore distractions.
So it's like those pretest questions act as filters, guiding our attention to the most relevant information.
Exactly. And there's actually some cool evidence from eye tracking studies that supports this idea. They've shown that pretesting can actually direct our visual attention during subsequent learning, meaning we spend more time looking at and processing the information that's related to those pretest questions.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. It's like the questions create a mental spotlight, highlighting the key information.
Right. Another interesting idea is that pretesting strengthens memory for the test questions themselves. And if you can remember those questions, it can act as a retrieval cue, helping you access the related information later on.
Oh, that makes sense. It's like those questions become anchors for the information.
Exactly. Now, a more recent theory called the attentional window hypothesis proposes that pretesting opens up a temporary window of heightened attention and active searching for answers.
A window. What do you mean?
So the idea is that after you've been exposed to those pretest questions, your brain is on high alert, actively looking for the answers. And as you encounter those answers in the learning material, they just pop out at you more, and you're more likely to encode them deeply.
Okay, I can see how that would make the learning process more efficient.
Right. And this theory can also explain why sometimes pre-instruction testing leads to very specific benefits for just the tested information, while other times it leads to broader benefits for related information. It all depends on the timing of when those different pieces of information appear in the learning material.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's like the placement of the questions relative to the key information can influence how widespread the benefits are.
Exactly. Now, to try and tie all these different theories together, researchers have proposed a three-stage model for how pre-instruction testing works. The first stage involves the pre-test itself, which triggers a bunch of psychological processes like sparking curiosity, activating prior knowledge, and creating a memory trace for those questions.
Okay, so that initial test sets the wheels in motion.
Right. The second stage is the enhanced encoding that happens during the subsequent learning phase. This is driven by improved attention, a more active search for answers, and the process of connecting the learning material back to those pretest questions.
So it's like the pre-test sets an agenda for how you approach the learning material.
Exactly. And then the third stage is the improved performance on the post-test, which is a result of that better encoded information and those pretest questions acting as retrieval cues to help you access that information later on.
It's like a chain reaction that starts with that initial pre-test and ripples through the entire learning process.
Precisely. Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on how pre-instruction testing relates to some other learning strategies that our listeners might already be familiar with.
Yeah, let's make those connections explicit.
All right, so first, pre-instruction testing can be seen as a specific type of test-potentiated learning, which is the broader idea that taking a test before you study can actually improve your learning from that study session.
Okay, so it's a subset of a larger phenomenon.
Exactly. It's also related to the concept of test-potentiated new learning, where testing on one topic can facilitate the learning of a new related topic, although the evidence for this is a bit more mixed.
So it might have some spillover effects, but it's not always guaranteed.
Right. Now, when we compare pre-instruction testing to retrieval practice, which is testing yourself after you've learned something, the research findings are somewhat mixed. Some studies find retrieval practice to be more effective, while others show an advantage for pre-instruction testing.
So they both leverage testing, but they might work best at different points in the learning process.
Exactly. It's likely that they operate through slightly different cognitive mechanisms and might be most beneficial for different types of learning goals.
Okay, so they're both valuable tools, but it's about knowing when to use each one.
Right. Now, pre-instruction testing also has connections to educational approaches like invention activities and productive failure, where learners are encouraged to grapple with a problem or task before they receive any instruction. The idea is that this initial struggle, this trial and error phase, can actually make the subsequent instruction more meaningful and effective.
So it's about embracing those aha moments that come after you've wrestled with something for a while.
Exactly. And finally, when we compare pre-instruction testing to more passive learning aids like headings and subheadings in a text or explicitly stated learning objectives, the research suggests that pre-testing can offer additional benefits above and beyond those strategies.
So it's like it adds an extra layer of active engagement on top of those organizational cues.
Precisely. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, but let's bring it all back down to earth and talk about what you, our listener, can actually do with all this information.
Yeah, let's get practical.
All right, so the key takeaway here is to really embrace the idea that getting things wrong before you learn can actually be a powerful tool for learning. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but the evidence is clear. It works.
So don't shy away from those initial stumbles.
Exactly. If you have access to practice questions or quizzes for a topic you're about to study, try answering them before you dive into the material. Don't wait until you feel ready.
So jump in head first, even if you're just making educated guesses.
Exactly. And if you're reading an article or watching a video, take a moment to scan for any embedded questions or discussion prompts and try to formulate your own answers or thoughts before you start consuming the content.
So engage with the material actively from the very beginning.
Precisely. You can even go a step further and create your own pre-questions based on the headings or learning objectives.
Okay, so I'm hearing a theme here. Be proactive, ask questions, and don't be afraid to get things wrong.
You got it. And remember, those initial errors are not failures. They're valuable learning opportunities. They help you pinpoint your knowledge gaps and make you more receptive to the correct information when you encounter it.
It's all about reframing our relationship with mistakes, seeing them as stepping stones rather than roadblocks.
Perfectly said. And the beauty of pre-instruction testing is that it's a flexible approach that you can apply to all sorts of learning materials and goals.
All right, so let's wrap this up with a big picture takeaway. It seems like pre-instruction testing, despite being a bit counterintuitive, is a surprisingly effective way to supercharge your learning and memory.
It really is. It's not about proving what you already know. It's about setting your brain up to learn more effectively in the first place.
And it all starts with embracing those initial errors, those moments of not knowing, as opportunities for growth.
Exactly. By actively engaging with questions before we have the answers, we actually pave the way for deeper understanding and more lasting retention in the long run.
So here's a final thought for you, dear listener, to ponder. Could deliberately failing at something be the key to ultimately mastering it faster and more completely? Take some time to reflect on how you might apply this idea in your own learning adventures.
Challenge yourself to step outside your comfort zone and experiment with pre-instruction testing. You might be surprised by how powerful this seemingly simple technique can be.
And for those who want to dive deeper into the research and really geek out on the details, we encourage you to check out the studies we've mentioned today. There's a wealth of fascinating information out